Hello from the top of Rockeries Pass. Today I'm off to South Peak, which isn't a location that I've visited on my YouTube channel before. It's actually a place I've only been to once, so I'm really excited to go back with this workshop group. This is actually the third day of our hike, so we've spent 2 days coming up Rockeries Pass. This morning we had an amazing sunrise, but now the cloud has closed in, so it should be nice and cool for hiking, which is good, but hopefully it's going to lift when we actually get to South Peak itself, because there are some absolutely fabulous views from the top. So I'll show you us hiking through the mist, and then hopefully we'll get into the photography. So on this trip we have the support of 5 porters here who are pretty invaluable at helping carry our kit at this high altitude, because we're at 3,000 meters here. So we've got Umjosti here, who's been on quite a few trips with me now, and this is Tando, one of the younger guys on the team, and Nala here, who helped get one of our group off a mountain last week. He unfortunately had altitude sickness. And this is Jovlani, another younger guy. This I think is his second trip. And finally we have Jeffrey, who is an old hand and guides us, helps set the pace for the group. So that's the team, and we couldn't really do these kinds of trips without these guys. And then over here is Z, our Zulu guide, the famous woman of the mountains.
The Queen.
The Queen. We're about 1 kilometre from camp at the moment and 2.5 kilometres from South Peak, where we're ultimately planning to go either this evening or tomorrow morning. But we've stopped off because the cloud inversion has started to break up and we can see through to the mountain behind me, which is actually North Peak. And there's an amazing cleft in the mountain here, which I've been focusing my attention on as the cloud comes and goes. So 1 minute we can't see anything at all, and the next the entire mountain is revealed, and it's these in-between times that have made for some great photographic opportunities. This was a real treat to photograph a location that I didn't really even know existed, because every time I'd walked past here in the past I'd been completely clouded out. And here we obviously had exactly the right amount of cloud as well to frame this smaller section of the wider escarpment. I guess this cliff is a few hundred meters high. So we spent a good hour or so here getting photographs just when the mist was at its very best, I think. And there were two shots here which are obviously very similar, taken moments apart, one in landscape, one in portrait. And I think I probably prefer the portrait image because it's presenting the mountain more as a portrait, as an individual. But the landscape is maybe a more natural way of looking at a landscape. So they're both equally effective, I think, and you can take your pick there. But my favourite image actually came when we first arrived, and I asked Mike if he would just walk towards the edge of the cliff. He's pretty sure-footed, fortunately. I took this adventure photo, and I've actually found these photos pretty difficult to achieve in the past, because getting the combination of the subject of the individual hiking towards the edge or standing at the edge combined with a fantastical landscape that somehow doesn't compete too much with the figure can be quite tricky. So I only have a handful of images that I like as much as this. So that was a really exciting shot to get. Once that shoot was over, we only had a very short walk to get down to the tents, which had been set up by our group of porters, which is a real luxury of these trips, I have to say. And we had planned to go out to South Peak, but then the weather started to come in. So South Peak might have to wait because the weather is coming in. It's just started raining. We've heard some rumbles of thunder. And the cloud is much, much lower now. So if we did go up, I think we wouldn't see a thing, and we might get a bit of lightning too. So time to go hide in the tent. That storm passed only an hour before sunset, and whilst we had a lovely comfortable camp spot right next to the water there, it was a bit more distant from our shooting location than perhaps I would have liked. About a 40-minute walk in all. At first gradual, and it probably took 20 minutes or so to get to the edge that you see here, which did have a good view, but you can also see North Peak on the left there, absolutely dominating the scene. And so we had to go up South Peak really just for compositional reasons, to get further away from North Peak and also higher up so that it would come more in line with those distant mountains that you see there. So sometimes going up mountains is for reasons other than to just be at the highest point. And that final 20 minutes is quite steep and quite tiring, so it was actually only Mike and Adam who decided to come up with me, knowing that we were very unlikely to get light whilst we were up there. The rest of the group decided not to go up so that they could save their energy for the following morning, which I will show you in a second. But it was certainly worth us heading up on this evening despite the lack of light, as you're going to see. So we made it up to South Peak, but that thunderstorm went on for quite some time. I mean, the thunder wasn't too bad, but the rain just kept coming. So we only left with 45 minutes to go until sunset, and it's taken us 40 minutes to get to the top of the mountain here. So I will just quickly show you around, but hopefully this shoot will be tomorrow morning, because as you can probably see here, there's some nice potential foregrounds with these tufts of grass, but actually no real light to work with. So this is the view looking towards the Cathedral Ridge. And then I'm going to flip you around and show you the view in the other direction looking towards North Peak. So this is North Peak, and you can see some nice foregrounds here as well. Whether I'll actually use a foreground though, I don't know. It depends on the conditions tomorrow morning. Obviously plenty of potential. You can see not only that prominent mountain, North Peak, but the Nueni Needles there just breaking free of cloud. It's actually quite atmospheric now, I have to say, but maybe a little bit hazy. And often in the mornings, that haze will die down into the valleys a little bit. Roughly speaking, the sun's going to rise behind me, so I am looking for tufts of grass that might get lit by the sun. And I think this area at my feet has some promise. So if I just get a little bit lower here, maybe something along these kinds of lines might work quite nicely. Of course, I am with a photography group, and they're going to have to take precedence. So if, as Mike is here, I have somebody in shot, I'll either have to clone them out or just find something else. But yeah, I think that one could work tomorrow. As I've been wandering around, the peaks have started to break free of the cloud, and it's actually quite a nice colour palette there. You can see the distant peaks of the amphitheatre appearing at the back there too. So this is really quite a stunning scene, and I think a little bit too subtle to start including foregrounds and adding contrast in the near foreground. So I am just going to shoot this as a very simple panorama, or as a 2x3. So this is the original raw file, and you can see it is a bit flat. It needs a bit of contrast. It also does need that crop, I think, to a panorama. And I think the resulting image is quite interesting. Certainly that cloud provides some real drama and dynamism. I think it would be rather flat without it. But I also realized that it was worth trying with a foreground. So I had to give this a quick go just before I gave up for the day. And it's getting very dark now. I had to shoot the exposure bracket at ISO 400, but I think this is going to come out pretty nicely. I'm not exactly sure on this foreground and the rock on the right in particular, but I think it does work. So actually a really enjoyable evening, and pretty happy I came up here. Now we've just got to repeat it all again tomorrow morning. So here is one of the unedited raw files that makes up the final image. There were actually 9 images that went into this because I both exposure bracketed and focus bracketed. So this does show you the original composition at least, and the problem with that rock, I think, on the right hand side, but also the general open space on the right hand side of the image as a whole. So I think this image does need cropping, and in this case, unusually for me, I cropped it to square, and I think it works pretty well in that format. I'm not quite sure how I feel about this image yet, but photography sometimes is just a really enjoyable process, and I'm certainly glad that I went up that evening because I've certainly produced something that's very different to what I produced the following morning. I wasn't amazingly hopeful for sunrise. It was cloudy overhead, and I could see at the edge it was misty and that we wouldn't get any views, at least at that point. But I also know from experience that if you go out on these mornings, just occasionally you're treated to the most spectacular conditions. So of course you have to roll the dice because you're only there once. And this was one of those mornings when we got a bit lucky. So as we started to ascend the mountain, we were first in very thick mist, but then it started to thin out a little and we could see a bit of brightness towards the top. And just as we reached the summit, it did start to break up. And I have to say, I love this video clip. It kind of shows you, I think, the sense of excitement that we had as we got to the top.
Okay, Mike, we want you to stand on top of that peak there.
Let me just paraglide over.
There you go.
We were up at 4:20 this morning to get up here, so we've been hiking for a little over 50 minutes. And you can see that we don't quite have a view of the mountains, but we have just got above the clouds. And what a spectacular thing to see. In these places, the photography is often wonderful, but sometimes it's experiences like this that make all the difference. And actually there is North Peak just appearing through the cloud there, so maybe I'll have a quick go at getting a shot of that. We're starting to get a little bit hopeful here, because just in that cloud in the middle of the frame now is part of the Cathedral Ridge. I think it might be Cathedral Peak itself. And if this ridge were to get free of this cloud around sunrise, which is roughly in the direction I'm pointing, then we really would be in for a treat. Well, the sun is coming up behind that cloud, and that edge right there just appearing is the summit of Cathedral Peak. Cathedral Peak is one of the truly iconic mountains in the Drakensberg, and several years back I actually camped on the true summit of it, so I have a particular affinity for this mountain myself. But I was of course hoping for something a little bit more exciting, and that came just moments later when the sun started to catch the clouds. The breaks started to open up a little bit more, and it wasn't long until North Peak appeared out of the cloud. And I didn't have long here because of course the cloud was moving relatively quickly, but the light was also changing quickly, as it does in the Drakensberg. So I did focus on my stills, and I took two images that I really love. The first is the simplest, and it shows the mountain just appearing out of the cloud, but the color palette here is really lovely and soft. The lighting really couldn't be better, so certainly an image that I like. But the second image has that bit more grandeur, and that's what I was really looking for from this scene. And generally when shooting in the Drakensberg, I love to capture these magical moments that really do show off the dramatic scenery. And it was that little bit later, so the clouds were a lot brighter at the top of the frame, so it's a little bit tricky to edit to retain those highlights. I couldn't crop them out because there just wasn't enough space above the mountain. But I love the broken cloud down to the right hand side, and the fact that you can just start to see hints of the ridgeline appearing. In fact, you can see both of the summits of the Unrani Needles there, which is a nice little detail, even if one of them is actually just a little dot there on the right. Yeah, so this is an image I'm incredibly pleased with, and certainly my favorite image from this location. This is the reason we get up so early in the morning and come up hills in the fog and see nothing and think nothing's probably going to happen. It's just for the chance of moments like this. Just amazing conditions. I don't really need to talk through the photography because of course it's just a matter of shooting the view and these clouds moving through around North Peak. But wow, what a morning to be up here. If you enjoyed this video, you'll be glad to know that I have at least 5 more really exciting videos from the Drakensberg coming up from an entirely new area. So keep your eyes peeled for those, and of course, don't forget to like and subscribe.